Thanks so much for coming to my talk today. I wanted to tell everybody a little bit about the facts behind my hardware startup failure. So who am I? My name is Eduardo Torrealba, and I used to be the founder and CEO of Oso Technologies. We were a hardware company based out of Champaign, Illinois. I started the company while I was in grad school with a few friends. And since then, I've become the research and development lead at Formlabs. We're a 3D printing company based out of Somerville, Massachusetts. So my old gig and my new gig don't have 100% overlap, but there's a lot of lessons that I learned that I'll maybe touch on here today that have fed into the new position that I'm in. And hopefully some of the things that I've learned can help you as you go down the road of hardware startups yourself. So what did I do at my hardware company? Well, I started out this company to build a device that became PlantLink. So PlantLink is an internet-connected soil moisture sensor. It was designed to be sold to gardeners. So they would take the sensor that's right there, and you'd place that in the soil next to your plant, and then it would detect the amount of moisture in the soil, and it would send that back to you through the base station that was right there. That was kind of the hub for the system. And then you would get text messages, emails, push notifications to your phone, letting you know when to water your plants. We started this back in 2011, so there weren't a lot of other things on the market doing gardening-related IoT, but since then there have been a lot of other companies that have kind of sprung up in the space. We did about $96,000 on Kickstarter. We shipped about 3,500 units all over North America. We got a lot of press. It was kind of all the exciting things. This would be like the positive snapshot of the company. But in the end, the company ended up running out of money, and all the founders moved on to other things. And so I wanted to kind of go through the process of that today in this talk. So I'm going to be talking about starting the company, our Kickstarter campaign, both what we did to get ready for it and then how it went, shipping the product, the downfall of the company, and then some of the lessons that I learned, and then there'll be sort of a brief coda at the end of the presentation. And to make this a little bit more interactive, I'd like to stop and maybe have a Q&A time at the end of each section, just in case there is anything that might be interesting to you. Instead of waiting for the very end, people can just jump in with questions sort of as we go. All right, so when I started the company, I think there were only really three things that I needed to start my hardware company. They were space, tools, and friends. When I was making this list, I was thinking about, okay, maybe I need to put money on that list, but we really only spent like, $500 between five of us, so we didn't need that much money to get started. And then, tools, we were in grad school, so we could kind of beg, borrow, and steal all the tools that we needed to build our devices. And the actual hardware itself was really inexpensive to build our first prototypes. And so I think, as exciting as it was and as easy as it was to get into this, this whole hardware thing, it was maybe a little bit deceptively easy and simple, because the gap between, a single prototype that you can build with an Arduino and a mass-produced item for customers was a pretty wide gulf, and we really didn't know that back at the time. A lot of people talk about that now, and I think it's more kind of widely distributed, but we were just so excited that we went after it. We didn't really know, what we needed beyond this starting point. So one of the things that we did know, though, was that if we were going to start a business, we needed to attack a real problem. It couldn't just be some kind of fun side thing that maybe would work, maybe wouldn't work. So surprisingly, we did have kind of a long-term vision for the company. And this map is one of the original slides in our first pitch deck. It was a map of water stress indicators in major places around the world. And we knew that as the years went on, there was going to be more and more need for smart water management systems. It sounds like a crazy thing to say here in 2015 in California during the drought. Texas had a giant drought a few years after this, and there's been so many different events that have kind of brought this close to home. But back in 2011, I think a lot of people weren't really thinking about this in terms of how can hardware be used to solve some of these major social problems. And we wanted to do something about that. We wanted to build this device that could be used to monitor water conditions for commercial applications and residential applications and all these different things. But we started out by wanting to attack a smaller problem, which was just gardeners and how do they keep their plants alive. So that's why we built PlantLink. We built it for gardeners. We thought that's the audience that we're the most similar to. If we solve our problem and we do it well, maybe we'll get a chance to move up the food chain and attack bigger markets down the road. I think in retrospect, I don't know if I would have started small. I probably would have just gone big from the beginning, because If you're going to fail, you're going to fail either way, and kind of prolonging that process out for a long time doesn't necessarily buy you a whole lot. But at the same time, I think there was a lot of positives that were had from going after something that was a little bit more attainable to get the ball rolling. So once you have the essentials together, you've got your idea, you're solving a real problem, you've got some friends, you've got some space, and you've got some tools. You can build some prototypes, and I always like to encourage people to build really ugly things to start. I think if you get wrapped up in the idea of making something perfect or beautiful, and not just super functional, is this even possible kind of level of engineering, you might be doing more than you need to. This kind of goes back to the minimum viable prototype idea. And we did a lot of building of ugly things. The two images on the slides here, the left-hand side is my kitchen table in my apartment when I first had the idea for PlantLink. And then on the right-hand side is a soil moisture meter that we bought from Home Depot and hooked up and stuck in a basil plant that we were trying to keep alive to grow some stuff for our kitchen. So, it didn't take a whole lot. You didn't need a whole lot of tools. I kind of said this earlier, but, building an ugly initial prototype is not that difficult in a lot of spaces. Now I work in 3D printers. It's a little bit of a higher bar to build the initial prototype for a 3D printer than a soil moisture sensor, but our initial prototypes at Formlabs in a lot of ways are just as ugly or beautiful, depending on your personal taste, as a lot of the things that I built at PlantLink. So earlier I said we didn't really need much money to get started, and that was true. But then after a little while, it became really clear that we would actually need some capital if we were going to make a run for this. And so we took a fundraising strategy of being totally naive, not knowing what we were doing, and just asking anybody we could talk to. I don't think that is unique. I think a lot of people do the same thing. And so we went to some people that were local. We were in Champaign, Illinois, where University of Illinois is located, and we ended up going with Sarah Capital, which was sort of a small early stage VC fund there in Champaign, and then Illinois Ventures is the venture capital arm of the University of Illinois. And these two funds sort of led our round, our seed, I guess it would have been. It was about $185,000 between the two of them, and there were a couple other angels that participated as well. And one thing that I learned a lot better the second time, and I'll talk about that later in the talk, but I should have learned the first time, is that when you're talking to an investor, and you have to spend a lot of time explaining the idea and the market and trying to convince them, and there's multiple meetings, there's almost never anything good that comes out of that. You don't end up closing those deals. It's just a distraction. Getting to a no sometimes is just as good as getting that yes, because you don't waste that time with those people. And between Sarah Capital and Illinois Ventures, I think it was probably a total of like 3 hours of conversation between the two of them that got us about 150 of that 185,000. So we really closed the lion's share of it very quickly with these investors. And at the time, that felt like a lot of money, and it still is. In like personal terms, it's a lot. But to get a hardware company up and running, 185,000 is really not a ton of cash. And so we kind of had our work cut out for us, but I think we thought we were up for the challenge at the time. Another thing that we were doing, let me see if this video will play. Yeah, so this is a time lapse of me writing my thesis. I won a GoPro at a conference, and my life was so exciting that the first thing I did was film myself typing. But I think this video is kind of a nice, way to talk about the fact that when you're running a startup, you have to be totally focused on that one thing. In a lot of ways, for the first 2 years of the 3 years that I worked on OSO Technologies, I was really just half-assing two different things: my thesis in grad school, mechanical engineering, and my company. And I'm relatively proud of the fact that I got a master's degree and the company didn't die during that time, and we shipped product and all this cool stuff happened. But I think that, I'm never going to have to start a company again while I was in grad school, but I would really recommend that people totally focus on the thing that's in front of them. If you're going to be in grad school, be in grad school. If you're going to be starting a company, start a company. You can always go back to grad school. You can always, start a company in the future, maybe, depending on the thing. But, really focusing on one thing and doing it well was a big problem for our company. I was one of the chief offenders of that problem, but really across the entire co-founding team, all of us were much more focused on our graduate studies or the other jobs that we got, that some of the other founders got after the company started. So I think, having those really blunt conversations with people and saying, if you're going to be in on this, then be in on it. Don't do 10 other things at the same time, is a valuable lesson that I've kind of taken to heart more lately since running through this. Great. So here's some key stats from the early days of PlantLink. We raised about $185,000 from January through October. We spent about 52 grand. We had a head count of 5 people on the core team, and then we did about 7 prototype revisions. And at the end of those revisions, we decided it was time to launch a Kickstarter campaign. But I think this chart here, these are like, for Silicon Valley, these numbers are basically like rounding errors to 0. This is not a ton of cash. And I think that sort of talks a little bit about how easy it is to do things in the Midwest from a financial standpoint. There are other problems that we ran into that I'll talk about later from being in the middle of the country, but there are really affordable places to start hardware companies. And Illinois certainly was one of those places. And I think there could be maybe some interesting things happening in the rest of the country where hardware could be the same price as software in the Valley if you do it in Michigan or something like that. So that's a lesson that I don't know that that's really permeated throughout the whole movement just yet. Great, so that is kind of phase 1 of everything. I want to pause, see if anybody has any questions about starting the company, and then we'll move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. First of all, you said you were kind of naive about raising money, and you didn't really go into what was naive about the way you approached it. That's number one. Number two, you said you raised $185,000, and that posed a challenge for you. But wouldn't your investors want to empower you and see to it that you're successful?
Yeah.
And also, what was the deal with the investors? Like, what did they want? And fourth, about the Kickstarter.
Okay, great. 4 questions. All right, so the first question was, what was naive about the way we raised money? I think, we approached it as, we'll take any money that anybody will give us. We'll be lucky if we get anything. Like, it was a very dominated stance if we were doing like a game theory sort of perspective. And because of that, we really, we weren't aggressive about looking all over the country or tapping into other parts of our networks. We had people in front of us, and I'm not knocking the investors we got. Like, they definitely were a big part of the reason we were able to be as successful as we were over time. And they gave us a really great deal. There were I couldn't say enough nice things about the people who invested in our company. But we really didn't know what we were doing. I mean, the term sheets that we got they would be bad from the Valley standpoint. I don't remember everything. I think our pre-money valuation was something like $1 million, which is not amazing, but it's not like the end of the world either when you're young and you don't know what you're doing and you're trying something that I thought was going to be a side project on my kitchen table. I didn't think it was going to be a common company. So I was excited when I got that deal. But now, I have a different perspective on what it really means to raise money and to do funding and all these different things. And so, yes, it is cheaper in the Midwest, but in some ways, your equity is worth less in those parts of the countries with those investors. Okay, I don't remember your other 3 questions. What was the next one?
So why was it a challenge at 185? I mean, why didn't you just get more money?
Yeah. Why didn't we just get more money? Because we were only going with investors that were local. We had one investor that I knew his daughter from something at the place I did undergrad, and he was really helpful to us, and he connected us with other people locally. So we just really tapped into that one network. We didn't try to go anywhere else. We didn't try to come to the Valley, or we had some connections back in Texas, but we didn't try to use those until later. And we just really did not know what we were doing in raising money. We just went with whatever anybody told us in the Midwest.
And then what was the deal? They give you 185, you produce your product, start selling it. What do they get, or what do you get?
Yeah, it was just a straight equity-based financing round. I mean, there was a pre-money valuation, and they put cash in, and they got some stock, and they got preferred stock, and then we went and made our product. So it was kind of from a lot of ways, it was very similar to raising seed money anywhere else, but the terms were a little bit different than what you might get. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So you asked about, from the burn rate, it's obvious that we weren't paying ourselves. How did that shake out with all the co-founders? And then how did we split the equity? And then how did that work out in the long term? So you're right, we did not pay ourselves any money for the first few years that the company was around. And that was an intentional choice. You know, we were able to raise a lot less money because we didn't have to pay ourselves, and everyone was in grad school, so we just used our grad school salaries to stay alive on. And then we split equity by doing almost an even split. So there were 5 of us, and we split the equity into 6 parts. And I got 2 out of the 6 shares, and then everybody else got 1 of the 6 shares. And that was a suggestion from one of my other co-founders. Since I'd come up with the idea and was like raising the money and all those things, they said, you'll get twice as much as everybody else. And at the time, that seemed like a good idea. You know, we didn't do a very good job with like vesting schedules, and ultimately equity ended up being a sticking point for a lot of us. There were a lot of conversations about how much do I own, and are you really doing enough work? And this is a really old story that a lot of us have probably seen in different places. So I can't say that the equity split was like the best thing I ever did in my life, but at the same time, I never felt like I was, you know, unfairly compensated or I needed more of the company. But I don't know that that was a common sentiment for everyone. Yeah.
Did you think ahead in this early stage to kind of, once you had your prototype, try to figure out if there was going to be a distributor or a manufacturer to build it, or was it kind of figure that out?
No, we did not think that far. I mean, we knew that we needed those things, but we really didn't think about that stuff in detail. And I'll talk about what we ended up doing in a little bit more here in the next section. Great. All right, so yeah, we had this prototype, and we knew that we wanted to get a product out there, but we didn't really know, you know, the best way to do that. So as we were thinking about it, Pebble released their Kickstarter campaign, and I think, you know, every hardware entrepreneur in the country got really excited because all of a sudden Kickstarter felt like this much more viable platform to launch campaigns, and so we ended up doing a Kickstarter campaign. We launched our campaign in January of 2013. It lasted 30 days, and we got, you know, $96,000. We were aiming for a goal of $75,000, and yeah, it was a really exciting process. I'll talk a little bit more about that goal and how it was set and what ended up happening as we go. But I wanted to share some concrete numbers. So, you know, we got some friends of friends to do all of our campaign for us. So we hired a guy who was a filmmaker in New York that had done some documentaries. We flew him out to Champaign and paid him to shoot our video, and that was cheaper than hiring a local agency. We hired a different friend to do all the photography for our campaign. He was a design student at the University of Illinois. And then we had a couple other people that helped us with all of our layouts and the graphics and the wording and everything that went onto the page itself. And so, you know, we invested like $3,500 in the Kickstarter campaign. That didn't include the cost for prototypes or a lot of those other things, but you know, ultimately that wasn't an insane amount of money. I mean, to get $96,000 out of a, you know, $3,500 investment for the actual campaign itself was a pretty good ROI. And you know, through that we still weren't paying ourselves, and it wasn't a sustainable way to do things. But it's pretty exciting that you could get that much back on that much money put in. And I haven't done the exact math on this, but I've certainly talked to enough people, including, you know, the founders at Formlabs and other people who have done multi-million-dollar Kickstarter campaign videos. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of like interesting correlation between the amount of money you spend putting your campaign together and advertising it and all these things, and kind of the amount of, you know, return that you can expect. But I think, you know, for $3,500 you can get 96,000, but I don't think you can get, you know, 5 million back off of $3,600. I think that, or $3,500. I think you need a lot more money and effort into being put into these campaigns across any crowdfunding platform if you expect to raise, you know, giant amounts of dollars. And that's what we saw, and that's what I've seen other people have said as well. One suggestion that I would certainly give people is, you know, it doesn't matter what level of quality you expect out of a Kickstarter campaign whenever you start making one, make your campaign better than what you would expect. So, you know, we had a bar that was pretty low in comparison to a lot of other people, but after we started doing that, we brought in other people to help. We brought in a consulting firm that was based in Champaign that did some design of, you know, the sensors themselves, so they would look a lot better. It was better, you know, a cleaner, functional aesthetic than what we were doing on our own as a bunch of engineers. You know, we knew we needed to elevate kind of the visual game of the campaign to really be what people would expect, right? If you go to some Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign and see that they shot the video with, you know, a tiny camcorder and they didn't have a good mic and they don't have any good images, then you're not going to want to give those people money. So we really tried to elevate our campaign by paying some professionals, less than the market rate, but still a little bit of money to come in and take things to that next level. So at the end of our campaign, we ended up raising $96,000, like I said, and our funding was successful. But the question mark on success is there intentionally because we picked the number to raise money for our Kickstarter campaign. It's funny to say this out loud, but we picked that number because $75,000 was the amount of money that we thought we needed to raise in order to convince one of the other co-founders to go full-time with the company. So we said, if we can do a campaign for $75,000, I'll quit my job and I'll go full-time and we'll start paying him some small salary and he'll kind of manage things in the background. That's a really terrible way to set a funding goal for a Kickstarter campaign or any crowdfunding campaign. But we naively thought that we had $185,000 in the bank and that'll be enough to do anything, even if we didn't do Kickstarter. So this is just like a good way to test market fit and get a little bit more money and convince this guy to go full-time. So we shot our video in November, and we put the whole campaign together. And then I was flying home for Christmas, and I had a video call with my co-founder, and he said, yeah, I decided I'm going to go ahead and not do Oso Technologies. I'm quitting, and I'm going to join a different startup. And he was the guy that we were going to try to get to go full-time, and we had built this whole campaign around it. And it was a really surprising moment, and it shocked me, and it frustrated me in a lot of ways. But I think the deeper lesson there is that communicating with the co-founding team is incredibly important, and knowing what's motivating people, and was I pushing that on him, or was he doing something that I didn't know about, or what was happening there. And if we had communicated as well as I do with the people that I work with at Formlabs now, I don't think that would have happened. So I've certainly gotten a lot better at those things since then. And I don't blame him personally. I think we were all really naive about what was going on at the time, and this company went under, so maybe he really did make the best choice. But yeah, I think don't base your Kickstarter campaign funding goal on what's going to convince one of your co-founders to go full-time. That would be kind of a key lesson to take away here. Yeah, so that's sort of that. Okay, cool. So monthly burn, key stats here again. We spent most of the money for the Kickstarter campaign in November and December, and then we launched the campaign in January, and then it lasted throughout the month of February. So it was a total of about $25,000 that was spent on prototyping and 3D printing kind of stuff through different service bureaus, and then some advertising during the campaign itself. And we did about 7 prototype revisions on the product between the initial idea and shooting the Kickstarter campaign video. Yeah. Yeah, great.
You mentioned that the way that you decided on the amount of money was the wrong way.
Yeah.
In retrospect, what would you have done? What would have been the right way?
What would have been the right way to decide how much money to raise on Kickstarter? I don't really know. I think my personal opinion on this is that if I see a crowdfunding campaign that's trying to raise less than $500,000 for an electronic device, then I just would never pledge money to that, because I think that you need a substantial amount of funding in order to be able to realize one of these campaigns. So sometimes people will put their goal really low so they can break it in an hour and have a news story, and there's all these different tactics and strategies you can have to juice your media numbers. But those are people who are VC funded, and there's a very specific strategy there. But yeah, I don't think I have like a magical formula for what the number needs to be. I think the Formlabs Kickstarter goal was $100,000. Is that right? Does anybody remember? Yeah, okay, good. I'm getting a thumbs up. And that's probably like a realistic number, something north of 6 figures. And they were, again, Formlabs was VC funded and had cash to be able to do those things. But yeah, I think if it's really like starting out people, you need to see a big goal in mind. One of the best companies that I saw do this was Spark. I think they're called Particle now. But their original Kickstarter campaign was for an internet-connected light bulb socket. And they went through Dragon Innovations and got some, input on how they should price things. And so they set their crowdfunding campaign goal. And then they ended up not hitting that goal. But they took everything they learned from that, pivoted their company, did, their connected board now. And then it seems like they've been wildly successful since then. So I think finding the right people to give you input on how to price these campaigns is really critical. And we just didn't do that, to be frank. It's a long answer, but that's my answer to that question. Yeah. Any other questions about how we did crowdfunding? Yeah, great.
Just go over the timeline here. So,
Yeah.
in the slide, the last slide, the first section, it goes from January of 1 year to October.
Yeah, so that was from January of 2012 to, I think it would have been October of 2012, and then November of 2012 to February of 2013.
Okay, so at this point, you gathered a total of $280,000 and spent about $75,000.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
So you still have a lot of money to spend.
Right, we still have a lot of money in the bank. So we felt really good, right? We felt like we were in good shape with cash versus what we had in front of us. And that's a nice lead into what's happening next, but I'll answer any other questions. Yeah.
So, two quick ones. So, for Kickstarter, did you guys have a plan for like driving people to your page? Did you do any of that?
Yeah, the question was, did we have a plan for driving people to our page? And the way that we, planned on doing that was that we talked to a lot of different potential customers through, just random conversations or creating an email list. We had a few hundred people signed up for that before we launched. And then we also had, our own homemade press release that we were going to send off to a bunch of tech blogs. And we launched the campaign, and before we could send any emails, we started getting lots of pledges on Kickstarter because we kind of timed that fairly well. We did it on like a Friday morning or something like that. And I think in the first 24 hours we got like $20,000, and then it like rapidly petered off from there. I guess, we can sort of see how the number went. So it's a pretty linear, progression after that first day with the bump. We got picked up by a few different services, but none of those stories were gigantic. Fun side fact that I was telling somebody earlier, the most money we raised from a single news story was actually Boing Boing. They picked us up, and we got like 10 grand off of that article, which was really funny over like the span of the campaign. Yeah.
The other question was, before going to the investors, how do you go into the market analysis and price point, marketing, everything? Do you have projections on how many units you thought you would sell some X amount of time? How did that happen?
Yeah, we certainly had numbers that we pulled out of our butt to say how big the market was and how many units we would sell. We looked numbers up and we did like due diligence. We didn't just like completely lie about it, but there was very little like really knowing what was in the marketplace. It was one of those like this sort of makes sense stories, and I think a lot of pitch decks are like that. To be honest. Yeah, so it wasn't an exhaustive or thorough search to be sure. No. Anything else? Okay, great. All right, so we did our Kickstarter campaign and everything was fantastic. And then the day after we hit our funding goal, we had to sit down and double check our plan. And this is a snapshot of what the box looked like when you could, pledge or get the backer report later. So for a basic system, you pledge $99. The campaign was in January, February, and you're supposed to get delivery in June of 2013, which is about 4 or 5 months later. I think this is the best image I could come up with to kind of accurately reflect how realistic of a scenario that was. It wasn't even close to a realistic timeline for shipping. And we didn't set out to lie when we made this campaign. We really did like our best estimates, and we priced out components. We looked at DigiKey and said, okay, each module is this much, and we think it'll take this much time to do these things. And we asked people, and we made our best efforts, but we just didn't know what we were doing. And so, I can't say there's like that many specific things that delayed us, but it was just kind of a combination of all these different factors taking longer than we thought they would. And I see that even now, at Formlabs, when we develop products or new materials, things take longer than you expect. But when you're a young company with really not a whole lot of money in the grand scheme of things, it does become very detrimental to spend that money quickly. All right, so when we launched our Kickstarter campaign, we were about halfway through the 15 prototypes that we ended up having to do in order to ship the product. So those prototypes, we had designed a system, we could do wireless communication. We'd started out with a wired system. We had some probe tips that were just 2 metal rods, and we thought that was going to work out. But when you start having to do 2,000 of something, you pretty quickly realize that, the method that works for one isn't actually going to work for thousands of them. So you have to kind of start redesigning things, and we quickly started getting into a lot of feature creep. None of us had ever managed an engineering project before, so we were trying to really, in a lot of ways, we kind of over-designed the system because we designed it so that you could make probably 100,000 of these things, but we only needed to make 2,000 of these things, and so there were certainly things that we did in that process that would have been good if we were going at scale, but we weren't going at scale, and so they just ended up taking more time than they would have to just do it in a less scalable way. I don't know if that completely makes sense, but yeah, we just really did not plan for production in the right way. We ended up getting to the point where we had a product that was certainly manufacturable because we did that, but it wasn't manufacturable in a way that made sense from a financial perspective. Yeah, so in a minute I'll get to that. But so financial perspective, we priced the system at $99 for a base station and 3 links on Kickstarter, and we thought that would work out from the way we had priced things. And then we went to go get quotes, and we got quotes from 2 different electronic contract manufacturers. They did pick and place, and they would kind of put everything together for us there. And then we talked to one injection molding company that was in the Midwest because we knew somebody that worked there. We talked to 3 different people that did chipsets to figure out the wireless module. So that wasn't a terrible number of people to get quotes from. And we talked to 1 person to make our boxes. And I've since learned that it's not really a great idea to go with the first quote that you get. That's a pretty naive approach to do things. Or even the second one. 2 points is really not enough to figure out what that line looks like. So the thing I'd say here is get a lot of quotes. It sounds really obvious, but if you've never done this before and you know somebody that works at a place, then it's easy to trust that person. And it's not that they're trying to screw you over. They just maybe they're targeted at much larger businesses than what you're doing, or they've never built the kind of product that you're trying to make. So yeah, I would choose to see them very differently now than I did back then. Once we got those quotes together and we started looking at the cost of building these systems. We generated our bill of materials. This is kind of a rough breakdown of what things cost. So for each individual sensor, the total cost was about $16.89 for each sensor not shipped. And this price also does not include assembly. So I think you can pretty quickly figure out that the base station would be more expensive than the links. And if you multiply these numbers by 3, you don't really get, or 4, you don't get to a whole lot of margin on $99. And so we're basically losing money on everything that we're shipping. And you add on top of that the fact that we hired 2 employees to help us get the product out the door, and our burn rate really went up a lot, and we quickly started realizing that we're going to lose a lot of money on this Kickstarter campaign. We weren't really going to have a product that was going to be scalable to sell tens of thousands of units either. So we were in quite a bit of a bind, but I think these numbers are not unrealistically low or high for any of these things from what I've seen out there. So, if it helps to know that a plant sensor costs $16 if you're not producing 1 million of them, hopefully this number is helpful to someone. Yeah, okay, so for timelines, we had talked to a couple of people about how long it would take to ship product from sort of the first meeting with a contract manufacturer to the time that you ship your products to your customers. And we had assumed that was going to be a few month-long process, but that didn't include the fact that our device wasn't actually finished being designed yet. So from our first meeting with our contract manufacturer to the day that we shipped was 12 months. And there were a lot of delays in there that were just poor planning on our part. For instance, we ran into some problems with the FCC that I'll talk about in a minute, and we ended up resolving those in November of 2013. And by the time we were done, since we were such a small customer, our contract manufacturers just said, well, we're not going to be able to fit you guys in before the holidays, so we'll just produce everything for you in late January, early February. So we just added months to our timeline, burning more money, doing things that, if we had known about that stuff in advance, we could have tested things early and we could have gotten the product out, months earlier. And that kind of did a bunch of double damage to us on fundraising, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so FCC certification was a really weird process for us because the 2 images on the left are the things that went out in the email chain once we finally passed. But on the right-hand side is the amount of money we had to spend to get our PlantLink system certified. And FCC certifications are like one of those things that people have different opinions on. You know, do you need to do it for Kickstarter, etc. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to tell you what you should do. But for us, you know, we thought we didn't have to do it because our modules were FCC certified. And then we found out that, you know, actually we did need to do it. And so we tested, we didn't pass. We tested again, we didn't pass. We got somebody to consult for us. We fixed the problems, and then we finally, you know, got that certification. But knowing that these sort of landmines are out there and really planning through the entire process in advance, it would have been much less expensive, and it would have been a lot faster for us. Okay, I'll try to keep going. I think I might be going on time here. Okay, so manufacturing, final run was, it was a lot of fun to like actually make this thing that you've been designing for months on end. You know, we got to go to the manufacturers that were based in Illinois and like see everything. That was really exciting. And then I wanted to put in our tooling costs. So we ended up doing this big family mold that had all of our pieces in it. So you could injection mold like link, top, base, a base station, front, back, and bottom. So it was 5 pieces. The family mold ended up costing us $42,900, which is a lot of money. If we'd done that in China, it would have been a lot less money, probably significantly less money. But you know, that number I think is also a pretty realistic estimate of what it's going to cost to get an injection mold made in the United States. So if you want to do that, you know, you need to have 50 grand in the bank to pay for that. And we had naively budgeted about $50,000 for all of our tooling and NRE and all that kind of stuff, and that ended up just being one part of that entire equation. All right, so one brief word was that, you know, while we were developing all this hardware, we also had to be an internet, you know, software startup inside of our hardware startup. We had one guy, Dan Whiting, that was doing all of the code for us. We had a couple people that did some front-end development as contractors every once in a while. But we like, you know, Dan and I would sit down with Photoshop and design our user interface, and then he would build it. And this is probably the part of the product that I'm actually the proudest of, because when our product eventually got reviewed by people like CNET and others, everybody like universally praised our web application and the setup experience and how seamless it all was. But I think it's an interesting lesson that like, even if you get one part of your product like really right, like super right, like great, as good as you could ever expect it to be, if you don't execute on the other parts, then it doesn't really matter. You know, very few people have actually interacted with this piece of software that we built and spent a lot of time on and like obsessed over all these details for lots of different reasons. But you know, execution in one area doesn't mean that your product's going to be successful. Okay, what's next? So assembly, I mentioned earlier that the price of the links didn't include the assembly because we were going to do all the assembly ourselves because we knew that we were going to lose even more money on these things if we didn't. So once we got all of our parts in, you know, there's an image there in the middle of all of our link boards drying in a 2x4 jig so that they could be epoxied into the bottoms so they'd be watertight. We got in thousands of these sensors. We programmed all the boards by hand. We had designed a jig to program all the boards. And then there was like, we totally missed the fact that we didn't have the right you know, stuff populated on the boards to do that, so we had to hack something together really quickly. And it almost didn't work, but it ended up working, and if it hadn't, then we would have had thousands of sensors that were unable to be programmed, and that would have been a really expensive mistake, but we managed to come around that one. So yeah, we spent a lot of late nights, you know, working till midnight, working till 2 a.m., stuffing a bunch of boxes to ship these things out to our distributor to get them to our Kickstarter backers. And then we got to ship our product. And I'd say this is probably the highest high point for me in the whole process. Just the fact that, you know, I was able to think of this product, get some friends together, raise enough money to do it, sell it to 1,000 people all over the country, and then ship thousands of these units. It's a really awesome feeling to ship a product. And there was a lot of things that went wrong, and that's what this talk is about. But ultimately, you know, if you want to ship a hardware product, I would really encourage you to do it because it's an exciting feeling to get to do something like that. Yeah, and you get to do things like get tiny little micro terrariums to put your plant sensor in at some weird hipster party that your friends put together. So it's definitely a net win. Okay, so this is, you know, one of our last sections, monthly burn rates. February there of 2014 would be when we paid for all of our tooling and lots of other NRE that happened. So we kind of spiked a lot over any other month and spent almost 100 grand. And we spent, from the end of our Kickstarter campaign to the day we shipped, we ended up spending about $500,000. And you know, if you're keeping track of how much money we'd been spending before now, this was significantly more money. And I don't know if other people crank up their spending that much when they're actually going to production, but that's what we ended up doing. So yeah, it was expensive. Our total headcount at the end of this, we had some of our co-founders had left, and we had hired a couple of people, so we had 6 people working on it. We shipped about 2,100 units to Kickstarter, 2,100 sensors to Kickstarter backers. Cool. All right. Any questions about that? It was kind of a lot. Yeah.
So where did the extra money between what you spent and what you had raised come from? That was the founder's pocket that came out, or did investors get more in?
Yeah, so investors kicked more in, and I'll talk here in my next downfall section about how fundraising went. But we ended up doing kind of a rolling close over time with some different investors, and got enough cash to kind of keep us afloat throughout that time period, but just barely, several times. Yeah.
So do you feel like the Kickstarter pushed you to actually ship something? You're still thinking about it?
Oh, for sure. I think if we hadn't done the campaign, we might not have ever shipped a product, because we probably just would have spent through all of our money, and we wouldn't have had hey, we did this successful campaign, and more people did kick in more money after we did that. So it certainly got us to the point that we reached. Without that, probably wouldn't have happened. Yeah.
Have you continued selling after Kickstarter, or was it just shipping and then we'll figure out what's next?
We put a pre-order button up on our website, but we basically didn't tell anybody about it. So we sold, maybe 20 or 30 units. We just didn't try to sell more because we had enough problem with what we had. We didn't want to keep losing money on these units. So we actually tried not to sell, which is a terrible sign for a company. Yeah.
So based on the financials, what should have your price been for a basic and free?
What should have our price been? So the rough number probably should have been something like 3 times the cost of each sensor. So a sensor would have been, 20 times 3, $60. That's a lot of money to pay for one of these sensors. So you're looking at, multiple $100s for one of these systems instead of, $100 for the base system. Yeah. I think when we ended up selling product, we priced it at $79 for a base station and 1 link. So that was a much more realistic, but still not totally feasible price for the product. Yeah. If we could redo the manufacturing the right way, would it fit the price point? I think if you could redo the manufacturing at scale, and you had a large enough PO from some big vendor, then you could probably get closer to that price point from what I've seen with consumer electronics. Yeah. Anybody else?
Also, radio modules are a lot cheaper now.
Yeah.
Dramatically drop. And you need to use a two-way radio.
Yeah, we probably didn't need to use that. We ended up liking that module for a few different reasons, but yeah, you're right. They've gotten a lot cheaper since then, and there are certainly less expensive ways to do it than what we ended up doing. Yeah. Great. Okay. All right, so now we talk about the downfall of the company. After we had a successful Kickstarter campaign, we ended up getting some attention from Y Combinator and Accelerator. We had a Y Combinator interview. I met Jessica Livingston at a party that I was at here in San Francisco, and she invited us to apply, and we got in the day before interviews started, and it was very exciting. You fly out, you meet all these people, you do the interview for 10 minutes, and then you get an email like this back from Paul Graham that says, "I'm sorry we decided not to fund you guys. We're impressed, but in the end, we didn't invest because we thought your market was too narrow, just techies that are also serious gardeners." And Paul Graham is not the only person that told me that. In fact, a lot of investors basically said the exact same thing over and over again as we tried to raise more money for our company. And that was the thing that really made it very difficult for us to continue, because we're spending all this cash, we're building all this product, we've got this unsustainable thing. We knew that if we were going to try to grow big, we would need to, redesign the product, do kind of like PlantLink 2.0. That would be cheaper to manufacture. We'd have to get, a deal with somebody like Home Depot or Lowe's or whoever it would be to really carry the product to the next level. And it was kind of a chicken and egg problem where we didn't have enough cash to go after those things, because you have to be able to spend so much money to produce your product. then we didn't have a product that we could do it. So there was a lot of, snake eating its own tail kind of issues going on with our company. And we got invited to do some accelerator stuff, but we couldn't, because people weren't committed to the company, we couldn't like move to China for months. And so that lack of commitment and that lack of understanding and all these different factors made it difficult, if not impossible, for us to really raise like a serious Series A round. Yeah. I believe the criticism was correct. Yeah, I think that the way that we were working with things, selling the product to techie gardeners is not like a long-term viable strategy for that business. But I think there are ways to do it. There are other competitors that have jumped on the scene. Y Combinator actually funded another company doing basically the exact same thing the next batch after we interviewed. But they had a lot more experience in the space and a little bit of a better strategy. And so maybe they'll be successful. I don't actually know if they've shipped yet or not. Yeah, so that was fundraising. A lot of people saying, I don't really know if this is going to work. And in some ways, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because without any money, you can't go out there and make it work. And so it was difficult to keep going without that. So because of all that, we did the thing that a lot of hardware startups do. We decided we were going to pivot, or a lot of startups in general, I guess. So we talked earlier in this presentation about the fact that there was this global water shortage, and we wanted to, be out there for that. But the ultimately, going after agriculture, while it would have been an interesting market, was such a gigantic pivot for us that we had no idea what we were talking about. We had no way to really execute on something like that. But that didn't stop us from trying. So this was the summer of last year. We built this internet-connected farm management system, some hardware that would detect everything and tell you, when it was time to not just water one plant, but water like multiple acres of a crop. And the prototype was pretty cool. It did its job pretty nicely, but we didn't know anybody in the industry. We didn't know how to do any of this stuff. We didn't have any money. It was a really big challenge. But for some reason, we managed to convince one pretty key group of people to give us money, and that was Bolt, the hardware startup incubator in Boston. They have offices in San Francisco now, and they kind of got the idea of doing, internet-connected agriculture that a couple other companies that were in a similar space that they really liked. And so we moved out to Boston. We took the company, we shut everything down in Champaign, we downsized our team, we moved out to Boston. It's kind of our last-ditch effort. And in a lot of ways, we were really not in the right spot to take advantage of what Bolt had. So they were an accelerator, and they certainly accelerated us to make that decision to end things. But I credit them with a lot of positive things because of that. Without those, that encouragement, I don't know that we would have made those decisions, the hard decisions, to kind of shut things down as quickly as we did. And they're really, well designed to help companies that kind of know what they're doing to kind of move faster. And we didn't know what we were doing, and so it really wasn't, the best time for us to try to do something like that. Okay, so I didn't really have a good picture for realizing that your company is dying, but this is the bedroom that I had in Boston where I spent a lot of time not sleeping because my company was going away, and I was, could see the number of the bank account going down, and everything was kind of ending. And so as you sort of realize that your company is ending, you start thinking about how do you tell people that that's happening. So we still had Kickstarter backers that were international, so that we hadn't have a chance to, ship product to yet, and we had other things that we had to deal with, and so we had to kind of announce that it was over. We didn't have any money left. We were going to try to raise some more money, but we couldn't get quite enough cash to really make it, for any kind of worthwhile amount of time. So everybody decided to move on, and then we ended up sending out a Kickstarter update, and Sean here wrote, I think, probably the best encapsulation of the feelings that a lot of people had about our canceling of our Kickstarter campaign. And this was kind of rough to read something like this, but he said that he wanted me to reveal the secret of my failure, and I think this talk maybe will do a nice job of placating him. Maybe he'll get a chance to watch this, but there were a lot of people that wanted us to say why did this not work out? But at the same time, most of the sentiment was, good job, thanks for trying, I really like the product. Most people were very understanding. There were a few, bad apples, but I had so many emails and phone calls and just a lot of support from not only the people that were customers, but also the broader entrepreneurship community. So even though the failure was very hard, it wasn't really the end, of my life the way that a lot of people might worry about when their hardware companies go under. All right, so in summary, this was what our burn looked like over the lifetime of the entire company. It was kind of a September to September thing, and yeah, we spent about $750,000 through the crowdfunding campaign plus investment money. We had about 8 people that were involved in the company throughout that time period. So, it's kind of an interesting peak there and sort of goes up and down, but I guess that's kind of what you would expect out of something that didn't ultimately end up working out. Great, so that's sort of the end of that section. I don't really know where I am on time. I might need to wrap things up soon, but does anybody have any more questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I have a little thing at the end about where PlantLink is today, but are there any other questions before I get to that? Great, okay, cool. All right, so lessons learned. Hardware is definitely possible. Nothing worth doing is really easy. It's difficult to run a hardware company. Startups are a tool. You need to have the right tool for the job. And failure is not the end. You need to realize that, even when you go through experiences like this, it can take you to a new place. And my time at Formlabs brought me to the new position that I have at my time at PlantLink brought me to Formlabs through some different connections I made along the way. And so overall, I think everybody who was involved in the company is in a better place now than they were, with the exception of maybe a couple of our customers who weren't terribly happy about things. But yeah, it was kind of a net gain, I think, for a lot of people. And normally that would be the end of this talk, but as we were figuring out how to declare bankruptcy for the company, we found out that there was a group of our investors, like one of their portfolio companies, said, hey, we could take this product and we could run with it and we could try to do some of these deals that haven't been able to come together in time, and we'll do it for equity. And so I said, hey, that's awesome, go do it. I don't really own very much of Oso Technologies anymore, and they have it and they're running with it. So if you go to Home Depot's website, you can actually pick up a PlantLink unit, and they have them in stores here in California and Arizona and New Mexico. I think it's selling on Amazon and a bunch of other places. So even though I'm not involved with PlantLink and nobody who initially started the company is really involved, it hasn't completely gone away. And I'm curious to see what happens next. There certainly could be something really interesting, for the Internet of Things in your garden. So it's sort of, it's not really an end, and it'll be fun to see what happens next. So great. I want to wrap up because I think I'm done, but if you want to talk to me, I'll be standing over to the side. So thanks so much.